me you saw that.
What are you making them skies, then?
Otto, how fares the realm?
The realm? Oh, she's just fine. As long as you look past the fat storms out mother crystals and her skies are a roiling cesspit.
And Gav?
He's with your uncle in the Free Cities, helping Mid with her project. Sent an owl their way the moment the winds turned foul. Still waiting on a reply, though.
Do you have any good news?
Well, that depends on your definition of good.
All right, fine. What do you suggest we do?
Oh, no, I'm just a messenger. I'll leave the scheming to those more suited to the task. Could be that Lady Vivian and Old Tomes have their own thoughts on the current state of things. Could be that they don't.
Bot Rix has correctly joined the channel.
I suppose not.
How is it that every one of your little excursions presages some inexplicable catastrophe? Not that you are to blame for the Dominion's fate. No one could have predicted the actions of the Crown Prince.
I'm sorry I couldn't save your home.
My countrymen are stronger than you think. A few toppled clock towers won't break their spirits. They'll be back on their feet in no time.
I hope so.
Look at us. Bluer than a pair of bog crabs. Tempting though it may be, sulking will not help us find a solution to this mess.
You believe there's one to be found?
I don't know. But I am certain we're more likely to find it if we first examine the facts.
Beneath these darkened skies, fear and confusion reign over Valisthea. Oh, the lands around the fallen Mother Crystals had already begun to wilt for want of ether. But not like this. Crystals that filled wells and fueled furnaces, now nothing but pretty shards of rock. And those that hang from the people's necks cast nary a glimmer of light to keep the dark at bay. It is only a matter of time before the common folk convince themselves that the end of days is upon us. Yet I fear a swift end is more than we can hope for. While most of the world thirsts for ether, the remainder drowns in it, spawning Akashic in droves. And amidst the hordes of mindless beasts, with magics as like to fail as function, even the strongest nation would falter. Rosaria and the Iron Kingdom teeter on the brink of collapse, while the tragedy in Twinside has all but paralyzed the Holy Empire. Dhalmekia fares little better. Rumor has it the ministers fled the capital after the fall of Drake's Fang, leaving their beloved republic to crumble. Waloed, meanwhile, moves in earnest. The Einherjar has been sighted off-storm. The world, in short, is in chaos. It would seem our civilization was nothing but a castle of sand, to be washed away at the whim of the waves.
A castle of sand.
Not my best flourish, but it seemed fitting. The reports I've received are considerably more blunt in their appraisal. Without the protection of their nations, it will fall to the people to defend themselves against those who would take what is theirs.
Which is only ever going to end one way.
Defending a farmhouse against a band of chocobo thieves is one thing. But pitchforks and palisades will do little to stall an army's advance. Should the King of Waloed deign to invade, there would be none to stop him.
None but us.
Is a storm coming, Sid? Will there be thunder?
Let me guess. You're here about the skies.
Is there anything you don't know, Lawsman?
It doesn't take a court astrologer to augur the obvious. As for what has disturbed the heavens, that, I believe, is a question the Fallen might be better placed to answer than I. And on the 6th day did the gods tear the sun from the firmament, visiting darkness upon their prideful sons and daughters. But I dare say you remember your childhood lessons on the sins of Zemeckis only too well.
You think they're connected? That Ultima was one of the gods responsible?
Well, he has certainly exhibited powers that we mortals would associate with the divine.
There is nothing divine about him.
But he wouldn't be the first god of whom that could be said, now would he? Yet for all the fairy tales that tell of the sins, there is almost nothing in the way of actual historical accounts. Had I the Journal of Moss the Chronicler, I may have been able to tell you more, but alas, I fear all remaining copies have been lost to time. You will forgive me, I hope?
Certainly not. Because there is nothing to forgive. Even without this journal, you've provided us ample wisdom. And we will always be grateful for it. Perhaps Otto will be more inclined to share his thoughts when he hears what the others had to say.
technology was coming in. The PS2 was just starting to be introduced, and with that technology came a lot of other capabilities for the music. So that's just when things started getting to really being able to allow the bandwidth to stream audio and not just have the bloops and bleeps that all the New York Times or whomever love to talk about video game music. Even now, after 20 years, it's just so old. But video games used to be bloops and bleeps, and now it's transcended the art and yada yada yada. Yeah, that was 20 years ago. But I went to school and I graduated from school and I worked for the summer. I was actually working more than I was going to school. I was working under another composer, and I got a wonderful opportunity to write, stuff for commercials and for movie trailers and underscore kind of with him ghostwriting for other composers, like a really priceless kind of experience, learning how the bottom crust of composers in Los Angeles survived. And it was very educational, but it was not really. I kept writing like melodies and I kept doing all this extra stuff, and my boss was like, why are you doing that? You just need to do the bottom line, like get it done and get it out the door. And it wasn't the kind of, I think I love music too much to just sort of make it like a punch in and punch out job. So I had some opportunities, being from North Carolina, back in Wilmington, to do some indie films. And I mentioned it to my wife, who we had both dedicated our lives to moving to LA, living in LA. I was going to be a film composer. And we left. We moved back here, which is where I am now. So I spent about 6 years after school, the first like 18 months of which were living in my in-laws, like my wife's old bedroom in my in-laws' house, because we were broke. I went back to work at the coffee shop I worked at before school. It's about as humble as you can get. We left North Carolina. Everyone's like, oh, you're going to LA, you're going to be a composer. Oh, that's so great. As I'm making coffee. And then you fast forward a couple of years and they're like, hey, I'm like, yeah, double skinny latte. And they're like, well, what are you doing back here? So it's very much like a humbling kind of thing. But I spent about 6 years doing networking locally, doing lots of corporate videos, and I did radio spots. I had politicians literally lined up outside this little studio that I had rented to come in and do their, I'm Jason Graves, and I supported this ad, just to do their little tag, and I'd drop music underneath it. I was doing anything I could do to make a living, and what I didn't know at the time was those 6 years where I was kind of musically frustrated because I wasn't actually writing a lot of music. I was doing everything but. So musically I was frustrated, but from a technical standpoint, I was learning about microphones and how compressors work and what an EQ does and how Pro Tools works and how to put a mix together. And I was even recording bands eventually. I would buy a couple of microphones and just kind of start experimenting with things. So it was very much like a trial by fire. When I finally fell back into the world of music composition, it was purely through the local networks that I had made and the connections that I had. Someone had a friend who lived in Australia that had a friend that was working for a video game company, and they were doing a game, and as happened back then, they said, oh my gosh, the game needs to be finished in 6 weeks and we still don't have any music. And that, like, 4 degrees of separation ended up getting my foot in the door, and I submitted a couple of tracks. It was based on this game called King Arthur that came out like in 2004, I think. So I submitted a couple of tracks, and I got hired for the job. And it was literally just word of mouth more than... I was doing newsletters, like printing newsletters. There was no email back then. It was all... I had 250 newsletters I'd send out every month, type up little articles and interview people and talk about what I did in LA, and I was writing library music stuff. I was busy all the time, but I just wasn't really writing a lot of music, which I think is important when you get out of school. If you're a composer, it can be easy, and Dave, we spoke about this. And you are not the dude that does
Guys,
this, which I really appreciate.
have a
But it can be easy for schools
Only
to
one.
pump up their
That'll be a
students.
first.
Bot
and
Rix has
expect that you've got
correctly
this big
joined the
degree and you're gonna
channel.
get out in the real world and flash your degree, and people are
We had
going
as
to
many
ask you to
owls
write music.
alive while you were at the shelves.
Every year, man. more and
Martha's
more
got a
competitive,
cash
right?
account
So you
against
need
and
to-
talking
you need to
monsters
have some
roaming
of
the
those
hills
life
outside of
skills,
Northreach has
in
put the
terms
wind
of
up Isabel and
production
her lot.
to be able to support
And don't forget
yourself.
Dalimir.
And,
Lubor says the
actually,
village was raided by
you can
bandits.
get to the full-time
When it
music
rains.
competition. But like
It
anything
fucking
else,
pours.
the best
The
things are
Ghostbreakers are
sometimes the
spread thin,
hardest to
taking
achieve.
stock of the
and they're,
damage in
like,
the
they're
Dominion.
made
And even
all
if
that
I
much
could
more
get
better,
word to
and
all
you
of them,
appreciate them
I
more
doubt they'd
because
get
you've
here in
worked
time to
harder.
make any real
Like, you've
difference.
earned it.
Which
I've
means
totally gone off on a
there's
tangent,
only two
so
people
I'll-
who
No,
get
I mean, that's something.
Yeah,
Jill and
that's
I-
my nutshell.
Let them
video
know we're
game
on our
thing.
way.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we talk about that in our class. How when you graduate, the degree isn't going to land you a job in so much as it's going to equip you to kill an opportunity, like to really grab an opportunity. But I mean, probably not going to get a 9-to-5 job composing music. You know, those jobs were rare to begin with, and they've all but disappeared. When you have companies like Blizzard, you know, kind of laying off their long-term composer, and that's literally what he did. Is he showed up, he wrote music, and went home. Those gigs really don't exist. It's a freelance entrepreneurial gig economy for composers, and yeah, I've minced no words in my class talking about that, which leads me to the ups and downs of the industry. You know, as freelancer, as an entrepreneur, and as you have to do, you know, your own mixing and your own mastering and your own taxes. Well, maybe not your own taxes, but I mean, you're definitely kind of a one-man. I know you're kind of a one-man studio, one-man shop. Even when it's so much about you, and you have to ride those ups and downs. And we talked about, you know, talking through this, but you've recently kind of walked through, I mean, the highest of highs, winning like BAFTAs and getting awards and recording at Abbey Road Studios.
Bot Rix has correctly joined the channel.
Nothing for almost 2 years. Can you kind of talk through that, and maybe how did your creative muse work through that, and financially, and taking care of a family and kids and mortgages and all of that? That all is in there.
Yeah, it's tricky because a lot of, actually, I should say most of my composer friends are married. Some of them have kids, some of them don't, but they're married and their wives work, which is like the best case scenario, because 10, 15 years ago, they were married and their wives were working as the main income, and anything they made was like gravy. And I think nowadays they're becoming more established because we're all about the same age. We're all more in our 40s now than we were in our 30s. So there's a little more pressure to be a partial bread earner. But I've never, my wife stays home. And we've got 2 kids, so it's always been me responsible for, well, for everything. And it's got its ups and downs. I think the best comparison I had, I was working on a Sony game with this amazing audio director who was also a composer, but he hadn't really written anything in the last 7 or 8 years. And he told me, we were in a cab going to Abbey Road to record, and he was talking about something he was going to be doing with Sony. He was going to be flying to Japan after this, and you know, I would never say like, you know, don't you miss composing? Like, you know, I mean, you're an audio director now. But he was the one that said, I really do miss composing. But what I love about my job as an audio director is like, my income is basically, well, it's not level. It's kind of like this. It's slowly but steadily rising. And as a result, my like interior anxiety and pressure to be a provider and all that is sort of like maintained. Is to, when I was a composer, I would hit peaks like well beyond what this little median curve is for income and like kind of happiness. It would go way high, like higher than anything I would ever experience, but it would also go so low, and it was just up and down constantly. And he said that it was frustrating because he had no real control over it. You don't have control over whether someone hires you for something, or if they've hired you for something, if that something gets canceled. And I think the biggest danger, and this is my point, and I will answer your question, the biggest danger, and I'm guilty of it, from 2 years of having no work within like the last 4 years, is you equate the kind of work you're doing or the amount of work you're doing or the fact that you're not doing any work with your inner ability as a composer or your talent or your competence, your quality as a human being. You don't have any jobs, so obviously you're terrible. And I think that's the innate version that all of us do. And it's very dangerous because it's such an isolating, lonely job. So I was busy for like 18 years. And I'd signed on 4 years ago to like one of the biggest games, the biggest game I'd ever worked on. And I actually started turning down a little bit of work for the first time. Hired an assistant to help me, had an extra room, bought all this equipment, and before the big first paycheck even landed, the whole game got canceled. This is a huge Warner Brothers game that was going to be like 2.5 years of my life. And the whole thing got canceled. And then within about 2 weeks of that, another game I was supposed to start on got canceled. And then about 6 weeks after that, the third game I was supposed to do didn't get canceled, but they pulled up shop for the audio department and ported them overseas and basically scrubbed the books, and we're going to start from scratch. So I lost all my work within about 6 weeks. And because I'd turned down some jobs, I had 2 years of nothing. These development cycles for games can sometimes be 3, 4, 5, even 6 years. So when things pop up, they're not going to pop up again from that one company for another 3 or 4
Bot Rix has
years.
correctly
So
joined
there's
the
like
channel.
This window of opportunity that closes. Now you fast forward 4 years, I've got 7 games again, and things are back up, and I've done a bunch of TV, and I've done some trailers, and I stayed busy, but it was hard because I just watched my savings over 2 years. Thank goodness I had it, but I watched it go down, and then it's like, okay, we have to sell the car, and okay, I have to start selling equipment, and then I started getting a little bit of work again, but that's life, and it's tough because you start dealing in large swaths of money with big contracts, and when that gets pulled out from under you, there's nothing you can do about it except try really hard not to blame yourself. I'm such a terrible composer, nobody wants to work with me. No one's going to say that on YouTube, right? Because they don't want to put that out there, but that's what we all feel. I don't care if you're a student or you're a teacher or you're a professional, or you're retired. There's that imposter syndrome that I think most of us suffer with. And now I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah. No, I think it's super important. And we did have a couple of questions come in that I want to get to. But before we leave this topic, we're both married, long time. I just celebrated 26 years with my wife, and you're only a couple years behind me. How was that? Because even though this is a lonely job, none of us are doing this. I don't want to say none of us. Most of us aren't doing this in a vacuum. You know, we have support, relationships, family, and everything around us. So walk me through a little bit of that. How did Ellen do with all of that? Was she had to go back to work, or was she there? Hey, no, buddy, you'll be all right. You'll land on your feet. You know, stiff upper lip, chap. I mean, how was it?
She's always been wonderful, and it's funny because I think we really, Dave and I lead parallel lives. And we're like the exact same personalities, and Shannon and Ellen, our wives, are almost the same personalities as we are. It's very much like we're best friends. We're not the typical like, bring me a beer while I watch sports and you fix dinner. It's very open, and she's always been, thank goodness, super supportive, because I can't imagine what it would be like if you're having to sell this equipment that you've saved for and you've invested in. I mean, your wife could be nagging you for money instead of saying like, it's okay, you're going to be able to buy that again. It's not a big deal. You know, you're losing 20% off of it. It's like incredibly supportive. I honestly wouldn't be here today without her. As a matter of fact, what's really interesting is these two pieces of gear, the compressor and the EQ, those are the first things I sold 4 years ago. This was like a month and a half of mortgage. This was like 3 months of mortgage. And I literally, 30 minutes before we started talking, they showed up. I bought new ones like 3 days ago, and I just installed them. Like, it's a literal full circle moment. And my friend Alan was here to help me because they're really heavy, but he was just saying, he's like, man, this is such a big deal. It's been 4 years, and it's sort of gear is not important, and I'm not trying to put more value on it than necessary. I can do it without the gear, but it's more of an emotional investment that I had, and I had to let go of that, and now I'm sort of back to being able to work on a. This is me mastering at home instead of going to Abbey Road.
Your
This
new
is not
companion
me
appears
trying to
much more
justify
formidable
hardware.
than your
This
uncle.
is like, I'm literally with an audio director yesterday.
Should I be
we're gonna
worried?
mastering the soundtrack. He's going to come to the new studio when it's finished, and it's
You
a
haven't been
big
introduced.
time,
Jill,
well paid off investment.
Clive has
that
told me much about
hopefully
you.
many of us can look
All
forward
lies,
to.
I'm
not
sure.
trying to splash it in anybody's
Your stylist
face
said
or
that Dalamil has a
anything like
bandit
that. It's
problem.
one of those like.
Indeed.
Emotionally, for
Although
me, I feel
you're
like
a little
I'm sort of-
late.
the studio's
They
being
left
put
with our
back
food
together
and
the way it
guild
was.
days ago.
I spent a lot of money on this whole
Any
story,
idea where
so
they went?
I'm very happy to
The
finally
desert's a
have
big place.
work again.
Your guess is as good
and
as
to
mine.
Need this.
But
like,
the
it's
fact
a
is,
job
I
requirement
have more
because it's what people
immediate
expect.
concerns.
Right on. All right, so let's get to a couple of questions. Atwal asked, do you get royalties for your game
As
compositions
if by
or
magic.
up front?
Let's just say we've yet to reach a
No
consensus
royalties.
about how to solve
Hans Zimmer
Dalamil's
tried to do
little
royalties
problem.
on King Arthur.
And at
which was
this
the
rate,
first video
it won't
game
be
that
the actions
ever
of the bandits
attempted to
which prove to be
license
our
his music.
undoing. It will
And,
be our own.
I think he
I've
wanted
tried reasoning with the
like 2
dissenting
points off the
parties,
top.
but
He
even the
wanted,
Desert Hare
he
has
wanted
limits.
2% of the game sales.
Perhaps we
for
could
them
talk
use
to
his
them.
music.
What makes you think
And
they'll
they
listen to
laughed at
us?
it.
What makes you
And
think they
asked
won't?
me to write all the music instead.
Which makes a fair point,
that
Sid.
that was the first
And
game I
you
worked
won't have
on.
wasted much of your
So,
precious time if you
if Hans
fail.
Zimmer can't get
Just
it,
across the courtyard.
nobody's really good. What I do get is money up front. And games pay really, really well.
Suppose we
compared
just
to
follow the
something like
shouting.
TV or anything but big budget film. Now, game budgets can vary a lot, but the big games definitely pay well. You do not get royalties, but you do retain ownership on all your writer's share and everything of all soundtracks if they're made, public performances, all that stuff. You get royalties, and sale dividends, percentages, and everything on the back end of all that additional media that comes out. It includes streaming and everything else, but nothing that's tied to the actual game sales.
Gotcha. So if somebody buys the first Tomb Raider from was it Crystal Works, I believe?
Close enough.
Close enough. Sounds Crystal Dynamics. There it is. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first Tomb Raider, you don't get money when the game sells, but if somebody buys the album on iTunes or somebody streams it, then you get writer's share of that.
Correct.
Okay. Another question: do you use a publisher or do you deal with the game creators directly?
If you're dealing with video games, they are either going to already have a publisher lined up, which is most of the time, or they're going to be an indie game, which means they're self-publishing. And in that case, you're included kind of underneath their banner of whatever publishing company they have created themselves. Now, many indie games that I do, including Myth Hunters, which you were playing, which I loved working on, my original contract deal included a soundtrack release, but since it was an indie game, I'm free to publish that however I see fit. So I've got 3 or 4 albums that I just put up that go like to Bandcamp and iTunes, and they stream on Google and everything. That I'm publishing the album myself, but it's not to the point of making money. I'm not going to retire on these soundtrack sales. It's more so that I can make the soundtrack available for people to listen to, or even I can post it on YouTube maybe for people to listen to for free. I'll charge $5 for the CD because I think at the time that was the minimum I could do and keep it sustainable on Bandcamp without them making me change things every 3 or 4 weeks. But yeah, that's 99% of the time the game company. It's like games, they want their video game, a publisher wants the video game to be a book, and it's open, and you're working on it, and when they're finished, they want to close it and put it away and never have to deal with it again because they live on forever.
Right.
So it could go from Game Boy to PS2 to PS5 all of a sudden, and there's this resurgence of all these old games. They don't want to have to go back and start tracking royalties. They want to be over and done with it. So it's kind of like an open and closed case most of the time.
Gotcha. Another question: do you consider what you do art? And I know we talk about this in my class a lot because production music and the artisan mentality versus that of an artist. But what do you consider what you do to be art?
I don't know. It always seems a little highfalutin to call it that. I think of us as creative people, and then maybe I would consider myself an artist. So I guess you could say that it's art, but it's more from the sense of being insecure and trying to do something original all the time, and less from the fact that what I create could be really considered art. The bottom line for me is, we listened to that first Michael Giacchino soundtrack, or we listened to, remember when that Music for a Darkened Theater came out when we were in college, the first Danny Elfman, like a little bit of everything. We listened to that, or Jurassic Park, or E.T., the kind of stuff that really moves me. All I'm trying to do is recreate that experience, but on my own, like literally sometimes all by myself, compared to a composer who has a team of orchestrators and music personnel and the orchestra and the recording engineers and everything else, because the schedule demands it. I end up getting a lot more time, but I'm all by myself. I think that's kind of what I think. It's more like the struggling artist to improve himself, not that what I do is especially artistic, I guess.
Right. All right. Another question. Which city do you spend most of your time in, and why?
I mean, besides where I live, like if I'm traveling?
I'm not sure.
Or where I live. So I'm in North Carolina. I used to be in Raleigh, but now I'm in Benson, North Carolina. We moved 4 years ago. So I spend most of my time here. I travel less recently, but when I was traveling, not because of the pandemic, just I think we're getting older, and traveling has sort of lost its glamour a little bit. I mean, 10 years ago, I literally went from like San Francisco to London to Sweden and then back home, and I was gone for 2.5 weeks for 3 different games and a recording session and 2 different developers, and I'd just be like, hey, let's Zoom, guys.
Yeah, I get that. I used to teach in Germany in the summers, and after like the 7th year, you're kind of like, I hate packing. It kind of loses your mind a little bit, and you're living out of hotels and suitcases.
I think a big part of it for me is, so we homeschool as well. We've been doing it for 12 years now. So my kids are both at home. I have 2 girls. They're super cool. My wife's at home. I work from home. And we're like the sickeningly disgusting happy family where we just hang out all the time. And so when I have to travel, if I have to go by myself, I just get really lonely. On the plane for 12 hours and taking the cab to the hotel, and it's worth it when I get to see people or if I get to go to Abbey Road. But even then, I don't think I've traveled by myself in the last 5 years. I'll pay to have one of my daughters or my wife with me. But besides here, I go to London to record. Abbey Road or Air Studios. I go to Nashville to record at Ocean Way. And recently, just like last year, I was at Skywalker Sound in California, just north of San Francisco to record. And then I go to San Francisco for the big game conventions. But it's like, I mean, my travel is work-based for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the happy. I mean, you are, without a doubt, one of the happiest people I've ever met. You have a positivity and shiny outlook. I mean, and ever since I've known you, it's just been a ray of sunshine, Jason. But compare that to some of the music you've written, especially like Dead Space, which is some of the dark. Like, I won't ever play that game. I'm not gonna lie to you, Jason. I will never play that game because I'm a big weenie when it comes to scary stuff, and so your music, just the soundtrack alone, I have to leave the lights on. So, where does that come from? From somebody so eternally positive, where do you find that dark side, or is it your cathartic id?
It was the scary stuff in particular, which I think there was this combination of Dead Space being as popular as it was, and then sort of riding that wave and having other people ask me to do scary music for other games, and the fact that my last name is Graves, which I mean, I had interviews where they're like, so what's your real last name? And I'm like, what? They're like, your real last name, that's obviously a stage name. Like, no, I've been Graves like forever. It's my parents' name and my grandparents and everyone before them. But it was honestly about half of it was something I got from college with Doc, our composition professor, who was very into 20th century stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm going to write a 12-ton row and try a couple of things. But then a lot of it honestly came from when I was at USC and I was studying under Christopher Young, who did Hellraiser, among other things, Exorcism of Emily Rose, all kinds of super scary stuff. But he also writes beautiful music. He gave me the score, I mean the physical score, the conductor score, which he had personally copied from Jerry Goldsmith of the original Alien soundtrack. And he's like a chain smoker, so he kind of talks like this. But he handed it to me. He's like, Jason, everything you need to know is in here. And he handed me the score. And then fast forward 15 years later, and all EA wanted was the scariest music in the world. So I started going back to Goldsmith, and then by way of that discovered Krzysztof Penderecki, who sadly just passed away this last year, a Polish composer. Threnody for the Victim of Hiroshima is like one of his most famous pieces.
Yeah, students
right, which, I mean, he freaking wrote that when he was still in college and won like the national composition award. I mean, we're not putting it on to like, you know, listen while we're eating dinner, but it's groundbreaking. And
you wouldn't talk like that if it had been your men whose throats were slit.
Every film score
blood
that does
for
scary
blood,
music
it's the
copies
only
all of
way.
this stuff.
We
So I
hire
just took it
mercenaries
apart,
and have
every
them
score I
mount
could
the
get a hold
bandits'
of,
heads
and
on
then
our
kind of put it all
walls
back
as a
together
lesson
with
to the
live
rest.
musicians.
And
And,
what
I
happens
think
when
the
those
reason the
mercenaries are
score is so
slaughtered
tense
like
and
your
scary
men?
is I just became
Are
numb
you
to
going
it
to hire
after a
more?
while.
We're better off
and I'm
using
like, it
that
needs to be
coin to buy
scarier.
food and
So I just
supplies.
make it
If we
more and more
hire
scary and
mercenaries,
ratchet
the
up the
only
tension
thing we're
even
buying is
more.
the bandit's
That
ire.
whole score
And you
actually
cannot
recorded
fill empty
like,
bellies with that.
gestures and
Do you hear me?
textures with the orchestra
But what
first,
happens when they
and then I
come
took
back?
them all home on a hard
Maybe it'll
drive,
be your throat gets
programmed them
slit.
into Contact, and then performed them
enough.
back in
Both of
Digital
you.
Performer. And that's the score you hear. It's all MIDI.
Any
but it's
more
just
of this
MIDI
and I'll
based
throw
on,
you out myself.
Custom samples.
Come back when you're ready
All
to
right,
talk
back
like
to the
adults.
questions from the chat room. Adwal asks if he may ask, and you don't have to answer, but he's interested in knowing how much someone in your position makes a year, roughly.
Well, I mean,
Victor.
Which year?
it's so
What's he doing here?
hit or miss. Probably an easier way to answer that, because I get it. If I were in school, I would want to know how money works. Like, how do you get paid? And I've worked on games. With games, you get paid by the minute. So a game company will come and say, we have a game and we need 10 minutes of music, and you know we're going to pay you $1 a minute, so here's $10. Now some game companies might want a package deal where you can include some live musicians, and I've done that before as well. Most of the time, the live is separate, and I'm not responsible for it. So I'm used to doing the math by the minute, and I have worked on games where I got $150 a minute, which is probably that Game Boy game back in the past. And I've worked on games where I've gotten like $3,000 a minute, and it varies every single game. I mean, even right now, I had 2 Zoom calls yesterday about 2 different games, and one of them is sort of at the high end of that spectrum, and the other one is at the low end of that spectrum. And I don't even know, honestly, what the actual rates are, because we're not talking about budgets yet. But it's still totally up in the air and unpredictable. And taxes really suck. You know, you mentioned taxes, but once you kind of get past a threshold of being not lower middle class anymore, your taxes go up to like 47, 48% because you're self-employed. And that kills me. That's something else no one talks about on YouTube. The taxes are just, it's like you make $10, your agent takes $1 or $2 out of that, your publicist is going to take $1 out of that, and then taxes are going to take another 45-something percent. So basically you're left with like 35% of your actual income. So if I say, hey, I'm making, you know, $1,800 a minute and I wrote 2 minutes of music today, that's $3,200. Yeah, it's not. It's like 30% of that. And then you have to pay for this stuff and your mortgage and everything else. And I'm not trying to discourage people because I love what I do. But there is kind of a disillusionment, I think, of seeing composers like maybe Brian Tyler driving his Ferrari to the movie theater. He's getting $1 million, $2 million a film score, I'm sure. That's what the big film composer guys get paid for an individual score. And games, I'm not making $1 million a score. I'll just tell you that. It's by the minute, and you're talking like 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. Some games I've done 3 hours, and that does pay well. But then, you've got to do the work. You've got to write 3 hours of music in like 3 months. So that's where all the outboard stuff comes in.
And you got to tuck it away in case the gigs dry up for 18 straight months.
Right. Yeah.
Another question, what does your typical workday look like?
I seem to be the anti-composer, and I've always been like this. I was partnered with someone maybe 20 years ago who was like a rock and roll guitar player, and if we were doing a dark track, he would literally sleep in until noon and then goof off, and then around 8 o'clock start working because he needed it to be dark outside to like get in the mood, right? Even though there's no windows in the studio. I've never been like that. I've always been deadline driven. So I am up in the morning, and I've discovered after years of doing this is my most productive way of working. I'm up at 6, I have breakfast and exercise and feed all my animals, and I'm in the studio by 8:30 or 9. I work until 6, I take a break for lunch, I take a break in the afternoon, and then everything gets shut down and powered off. Time with the family, watch a show or whatever, or a movie, hang out, maybe play some video games with the girls. When I'm busy, this is the schedule, in bed by 10:30 or maybe 11, and then up the next morning at 6. And that's Monday through Friday, then I have the weekends off. And I can write more music doing that really boring kind of regimented schedule than I could if I was just all over the place, or even if I worked 18 hours a day, because I get tired. And after 3 days of getting tired, that musical idea machine turns off, and I just sit there going, this all sounds horrible, I have no ideas, and I delete it and I start over, and then I start wasting time. I can do like 3 or 4 minutes a day under that kind of a schedule, and I can do it for months at a time because I get the time off, and it means my ears aren't tired, it means my brain's not tired, it means my body's not tired, plus I get that rejuvenation, especially on the weekends.
Jeez, Jason, we are the same person, except I get up at 5. Haha.
Nice.
But no, absolutely. I'm the same way. Get up early, do walk, make coffee. I'm sitting in the studio by 6:30, 7 o'clock, and especially now with everything, kind of all, I'm not having to spend an hour to hour and a half on the road driving into the office and everything.
Right.
but absolutely, working through the day and shut it down. Don't push yourself past. For me, don't push yourself past 6 or 7 o'clock because, A, you're going to torch yourself, and I find that I torch relationships, and we don't do this in a vacuum, and we can't do it for long in a vacuum without the people around us supporting us. All right. So another question from Michael Skitchiano, who I know that you know.
Skitch.
Yeah. Skitch had a question. Skitch, did you want to unmute yourself and ask that, or I can read it if you want? You should be able to unmute yourself, I believe.
Hey there, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Hey, there he is. It's like GDC.
That's right. Yeah, I'm wearing a GDC shirt right now.
Actually. Turn on your camera, buddy.
Oh, sure thing.
Gotta see.
There we go.
Get dressed first. Oh, there we go.
Oh, no, don't worry. I already took care of that part, at least. Yeah, so you alluded to this a little bit, but one of the main sort of, I think, probably the biggest challenge about being like a freelance composer or really a freelance audio professional at all is operating both as a creative and as a business at the same time, especially if you're trying to be freelance and being both in a single person. And so one thing I'm always interested in, because I still struggle in operating cleanly as a freelance business and creative at the same time, is are there any resources, books or otherwise, that helped you kind of figure out how to operate as a business and a creative at the same time in your line of work, Jason?
There probably are, but I've never read any of them because I imagine I would fall asleep after like page 5. But what I did from the very beginning is I incorporated, which I think is important, and I created a company as a subchapter S, which essentially is like Yes, an S corp. Yeah. So I'm independently employed, but my corporation basically is like a shield from if heaven forbid something went wrong and like EA sued me because of whatever. They can't take my house. They can only take my studio stuff.
The shell of liability that separates the business side of you from your personal finances and property and otherwise, right?
Right.
And I guess,
but, I mean, other than that, I just like, I keep changing accountants, but you know, it's about having a decent accounting program, or I prefer a person so that I can just say, here, please make this work, which of course costs money and taxes cost money, but not paying taxes costs a lot more money.
Right, sure.
Yeah, you kind of get a threshold where you pull in enough income where you need an accountant, you need a guy or a girl, you're a gal, you need someone who can do it for you because it's too much. When you start pulling in income that rivals a full-time job and it's all freelance, and you realize no one is taking taxes out of any of this, and everything that the employer usually does, that's when the financial liability becomes really, really heavy. Kathy asked a question. Did you seek legal assistance to get your corporation set up?
I don't remember, but I think I did. I think I just talked to a business attorney, and it was $150, and
Cid and Lady Jill. What brings you here?
I was about to ask you the same thing.
Costness is in chaos, and the markets have all but ceased to operate. The Briar's Kiss here in Dalamil is the only place I can reliably obtain supplies. I was here to do just that when Master Lubor told me of his troubles. He thought I might be able to talk some sense into these fools. But if you're here, I suppose his patience must be waning.
Who are those people?
Those were the thorns in Lubor's side. And the reason this place might be headed the same way as Costness. It's these accursed skies. The darkness is enough to drive a man to madness. Or an entire city, for that matter.
We're still working on the skies. But in the meantime, perhaps we can find a solution to Dalamil's problems.
I hope so. For all our sakes.
So, you see my predicament?
What I saw was a room full of people who were angry and afraid. And with good reason by the sound of it. But if left to smolder, that anger and fear could set the entire town alight.
My thoughts exactly. What to do? Both sides wish to protect their homes and livelihoods, if only they could agree on how. But as long as they are divided, we are vulnerable.
And if there's one thing bandits like, it's an easy target.
What would Cid the Outlaw suggest?
Well, if it were my namesake, he'd let them choose for themselves and be on hand to pick up the pieces when it all went wrong.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
A recipe for disaster is precisely what it is. But perhaps that realization would be enough to make them question the ingredients. While it's plain neither Conrad nor Natalie will countenance the other's proposal, it may still be possible to make them doubt their own. before presenting them with a third option.
And that would be?
To pool our resources and save the city ourselves. Why fight each other?
When all that fear and anger can be directed at the bandits.
It appears we have a plan of action. Victor, pay Conrad a visit. See if you can't convince him of his folly. I'll speak with Natalie.
As you wish.
Your faces are not well known in this town. That may prove useful. Don't worry, Victor and I will do most of the talking. You need only play along.
Play along.
What he means to say is yes.
My shop.
Why would anyone do so?
If I had my pickaxe, I would have...
I mean, it may still be possible to buy something. Ah, here he is now. Natalie, allow me to introduce Lord Underhill of Randalar's prestigious League of Merchants.
Lord Underhill. At your service.
Underhill.
I was just telling the good lady of our conversation, my lord, and how you were lamenting the state of the capital's stores.
Lubor says that not only are the granaries almost empty, but that war and the Blight mean this season's harvest won't be enough to fill them for winter.
Indeed, certainly that is the case. The nobles in the capital are buying up the city's stocks of barley and wine, driving the prices higher than most commoners can afford. It is only a matter of time before the peasants revolt.
It is worse than I thought. If what Lord Underhill says is true, I fear we have little hope of supplementing our stores, meager though they regrettably are. And while I applaud your endeavors to dissuade our more bellicose citizens from seeking vengeance, I sense Conrad is not wrong in his assessment of the bandits' likely return. Which means that now, more than ever, we will need to secure what little we still have. Food, weapons, herbs, everything. If our humble town is to endure not only this hardship, but those that are certain to follow, we must stand united.
All right. If it will help to protect my home, I'll do it. But you needn't have gone through this charade.
Thank you, Clive. Your performance was nothing if not workmanlike.
She saw right through it.
I didn't say it was good, merely that it produced the desired effect. Now, my scouts should be returning shortly. Meet me back at the Briar's Kiss, and we shall see what we face.
It appears I have no choice but to do what little I can to defend what little we have.
Mummy, I'm scared.
Oh, I'm ruined.
Picture it, Conrad. Ah, here she is. The Lady of the Spear herself. Conrad, may I introduce you to Jane, commander of the Red Wings, the oldest mercenary guild in the Free Cities.
A pleasure, my lady.
The pleasure is all mine.
As I told you, I summoned the commander here from Canver to inquire about a contract.
Victor says you told him no. That there aren't any men left to hire. Is that true?
True as the crystal's cracked. Nobles came and claimed every last one worth his salt. And not just from us Red Wings. You know of the 7 high houses. There must be 2 swords assigned each one. Granted, we have a few boys left. If it's boys you're looking for.
Well, Conrad? Are you saying that Dalamil's finest cannot defend this town better than a gaggle of unblooded striplings? That a band of beardless youths could better avenge the deaths of your brave men than you yourselves?
Absolutely not. We'll show those bastards who they're dealing with.
I can't believe that actually worked.
Conrad's not what you called the brightest candle in the crypt. And there's a reason why I had you do the talking and not Sid. Well played, my lady.
I'm not convinced our roles in this ruse were entirely necessary.
I don't know. Conrad seemed quite taken with you.
Then let us band together and show these brutes that Dalimil is not to be trifled with.
Good news, Sid. Both Conrad and Natalie have somewhat gracefully accepted their new roles. With time, they may even learn to...
Bot Rix has correctly joined the channel.
It was before lunch. I take it your scouts found the bandits.
Technically, it would be the bandits who found my scouts. It appears they march for Dalimil as we speak. All of them.
You're not serious.
They don't just want food, they want the whole damn town.
I have a favor to ask. I'm told the bandits march in 2 groups, one from the south and one from the desert, in a move doubtless intended to stretch our already gossamer-thin defenses.
Very well. Jill and I will meet those from the desert. But what of the rest?
The rest, my friend, the city shall fight. Together. The stakes, I concede, are high. But if this does not unite Dalimil, nothing will.
That is a lot of faith to put into those who had their hands around each other's throats but a moment ago.
Then it will be for us to see that their hands are kept occupied. And I do mean us.
I thought you might say that.
We'll hold them off for as long as we can.
And we will do the same.
The womenfolk have come to welcome us.
I'll take that one.
He's all yours.
Overwhelm us.
The townspeople. Could they have held out?
I don't hear any fighting. What do you think?
That we should hurry.
Natalie, I owe you an apology. You did well out there. The inn would have been lost had you not held the line.
Without you, there would have been no line to hold. You saved us, Conrad. You saved Dalimil.
We all saved Dalimil.
Conrad seems to have had a change of heart.
Bot Rix has correctly joined the channel.
Take it from your presence that our visitors from the desert won't be joining us either. Pity.
The plan worked, Sid. Granted, it only took an army of bloodthirsty bandits at our gate.
Calm now, Victor. Why quibble over the details? We are united, and that is all that matters. As for you, Sid, you fight considerably better than you act.
I'll take that as a compliment.
He got it all set up, and I was incorporated and good to go.
Yeah, and there's also like LegalZoom and everything. I've been.
Oh, nowadays, yeah, this was 20 years ago.
I've been running as a sole proprietor since the beginning, but this is the first year where I need to seriously look at like an LLC or something like that. Yeah, Tony says asset protection. Any other questions from the chat? I'll let you guys ask that. I wanted to circle back to something, and you mentioned ghostwriting, and I know one of the career paths that many composers take is the assistant composer, ghostwriting kind of path. And you mentioned Hans Zimmer and Remote Control Studios is kind of geared up that way, but it's not just their studio that does it. Do you feel like that's
Bit of bloke saying he saw ghosts on the far side of the wall.
get into the industry, or how do you feel about that and ghostwriting and composing assistants in general?
I know, personally, I know two guys
I
that
saw it
used
with
to
my
do
own
that.
eyes. The whole
One
of
them you
Oriflame
probably know,
under a
one of them
flood.
you probably don't. But
Then we're
the
next.
first one is Keith Power, who's an incredible composer. He was underneath Brian Tyler 10 or 12 years ago. He was ghostwriting on Hawaii Five-0 for 3 years. He did the entire show. I can't do it. And then he started getting credit as music by Brian and Keith. And then they did a MacGyver show, and Brian was like, Brian didn't tell me this, but basically, Brian was
We
busy,
received the dame's
and
message.
they had Keith do the music.
There have been sightings
He
of
got
strange
credit
creatures,
for
I
that. Then they did
understand.
Magnum PI,
With the blue eyes.
and Keith got credit
Yes.
for that.
Like
The
a
other
Kashyyyk,
composer
but
I know that came up that way is Lauren
different.
Balfe, who
They've taken
was
so
under
many.
Hans Zimmer
I've
and
lost
ghosted
count.
for a long time, got credits with Hans for a
Like
long time,
Kashyyyk,
and now
but
is doing
different.
some of the best modern cinematic
Ultimate
film
thralls.
scores, I think. Like that last Mission Impossible he did.
And what of your mistress?
Amazing. So that's definitely the
No.
upward
She
trajectory.
went to the garrison to ask what they were
career
planning on
path.
doing
Now,
about
I know
all
both
this.
of these guys personally.
Then we'll look for her
and I
there.
know the struggles they went through, and it's by no means a guaranteed thing. And both of them have been equally frustrated, as I have, with jobs in general. But there's something to be said. It's not the only way to do it, but there's something to be said for having a relationship with someone else who's very busy and needs to know they can rely on you to do something, even if you're not getting credit for it. Because eventually, they're going to need you to do something, and they're going to need you to do so much of it that they're going to want to give you some credit for it. And that's how Keith and Lauren both sort of had their jobs evolve out of the ghostwriting thing. I did a little bit of ghostwriting for this composer in LA, but none of it really went anywhere because it wasn't anything big enough. He was actually ghostwriting for someone else, and I was ghostwriting for the ghostwriter. So I was like too many steps removed.
Grand ghostwriting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I never really did that thing underneath the composer who was busy, but I have had a couple of instances for TV and for games where the assistants that I had at the time, I was too busy, and I had them write a couple of cues for me. And the beauty about ghostwriting is you don't get credit on screen, but you can credit it yourself. So you can say, this is a uncredited cue that I wrote when I was working for X composer, and I worked on this show. But that doesn't mean it's the only way. It's just the most obvious way, I think. Nowadays, online with everything, the best way to get a gig is to sort of come up in the trenches with other people doing the same thing that you love to do. Another game company, or they don't have any money just like you don't, and you're trying to make something fun, or you're a friend from college who's making a film and barely has any budget, but it's going to get maybe picked up by a movie studio and released to video. I've always found the personal relationships with people that you get along with, people that you relate to, people that you have common interests with, outside of all the music stuff, is the most important. Because we're just going to assume that we can all write good music and we can do something that's going to be emotionally responsive when people watch the movie or play the game. It's all about the relationships with the people. Because mostly, you're working by yourself, but then you're dealing with the people for corrections or for updates or for a new edit or whatever. And it's all about the relationships.
Yeah, networking isn't just passing out your business cards. It's relationships. It's about cultivating relationships. Had another question come through. What was the toughest challenge you had to overcome working as a composer in the gaming industry, and how did you overcome it, and what did you do to overcome that challenge?
Toughest. Honestly, I sort of feel like every new game is kind of the toughest challenge. If you talk about Dead Space, that was probably that's what I got the most gray hair from, because I was doing all those sample instruments myself. I was playing in a band, going to gigs in the back of a truck with my laptop, like typing out the orchestrations for the recording session that was going to happen in 2 weeks. I did everything by myself. So I think physically that was probably the toughest. But every job, I mean, I started this game called Far Cry Primal. I always pulled myself up to these incredibly lofty ideals, and it's a Stone Age game. I'm not going to use anything that doesn't involve like dirt or clay,
we could leave
stone or bamboo. And and I ended up doing it. And on the other side, it's like, sure, you listen to the soundtrack and it makes sense, but about halfway through, it's like, what am I doing? How am I going to write like 5 minutes of action about literally
half the garrison's been slaughtered by those things. We lost the captain this very morning.
We've tried requesting reinforcements, but there's been no word from the capital or the Dominion in days.
Inside of yourself,
what more would you have us do?
I would have you do your duty. Those at the Vale look to me for protection.
I feel like
protect them I shall, because they are my charges and that is my duty. In case you have forgotten, the people of this town are your charges. But more than that, they are your people, your sisters, your brothers, your lovers. So you have a choice. Lay down your sword and watch as they are slaughtered, or take it up and do what is right.
Write the music that day, and it's done. And then the
She
next
speaks
day
the
I
truth,
gotta
you know.
write more music.
This is it.
Done.
It's all we have.
Committing to
It's all that's
that,
left.
I think, is the hardest.
What we have left is our lives.
It's never fun because you're
Do
always
you
like,
really want us to lose them as
my
well?
wife says, "Dinner's
Not
ready."
if we don't have to.
If I had 5 more
Look,
minutes, I could.
there's a
I could keep this
cask under the
reverb.
captain's bunk.
Done.
Let's
Now maybe I'll
talk
maybe
about
I'll
this
EQ
over a
the
drink,
reverb
eh?
in the morning if I still think it needs it. But most of the time,
I'm listening.
I'm within about a 10-minute threshold of finishing whatever track I need to
I'll have a
finish
word
by the
with
end of the day, and I'm like, okay, well that's it. I hit export. I go eat dinner. I come back upstairs and post it, and I'm done. Shutting the door.
Yeah, that's the right,
Clive.
submit, forget, repeat.
I didn't expect help to
thing
arrive
that,
so
you know,
quickly.
Dean Propane talks about in his book. And,
Sought to take
and
matters
the
into my
whole,
own hands.
It
was a noble
forum
effort.
movement about
But I
writing
thought
it,
you might still need some
putting
support.
it out there,
I'd
submitting
like
it,
you
and
to
forgetting
consider
about
my
it and moving
needs.
forward, not just getting caught in this kind of
What we
feedback
need to
loop of,
consider
always better,
is
always
where
better.
the creatures
Another
came
question
from.
came through from
The
Ethel.
way the
How much
survivors
time do
speak
you
of them,
spend
one would
actually
think they
playing
appeared
video
out of
games?
thin air.
How important do you think it is to do so
And perhaps they did.
for a game composer?
It's hard to know what to believe these days.
I'm the worst example of the person to ask that.
We'll
Because
talk
I
to the
grew up
survivors.
with a best friend that could play 1941 on a quarter for like an hour, and then I put my quarter in and I'd be dead in a minute. So I do play a lot of games, but usually I'm playing developer versions of the games. So I've got like infinite ammo and God modes on, and I'm doing it to experience the game. Now I sit with my daughters, and we'll go through, Skyrim or Zelda or Animal Crossing or anything like that. I'll sit there and maybe shop on Reverb while they're playing and sort of interact with the game that way. But I'm an awful player, and honestly, I'd rather just have a QuickTime movie of it so that I can throw it into Cubase and kind of watch it unfold in real time as the music's going. But that being said, I don't think that's the best example of how to present yourself. And I lied about it for probably the first 15 years of my career. It's like, oh yeah, I play games all the time. Yeah, that new Call of Duty, I'm so there. And then I'd be the developer, and they'd hand me the controls, and I'd get lost, like, in the room. They're like, no, the door's the other way. No, it's the other way. I'm like, why don't you play so I can focus on the music? Now I just say that I don't have time.
Is it one of those things where you've seen the sausage being made, and so like you like I can't watch football as the same way because I'm so deep into like the music that goes all behind it, Is it one of those things where know how it's all put together and it's a little bit of that innocence is robbed from you? Right?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And it would be like if you were watching a football game and they're like, okay, Dave, we're going to play you 15 minutes of this football game, except you're having to play football, right? And they're like, and we want you to put music behind this. So go ahead and play the game and think about what music you want to do. And it's like my brain needs to focus on one thing or the other. But I don't want anyone to think that means it's not important to play games, because most of my really good friends, Austin Wintory is a great example, are prolific gamers, and they will have played every game under the sun plus the game they're working on. I think Austin literally claims he's played Journey more times than anybody else on the planet. I believe him, because he'll just sit there and play for 5 hours and figure out how the music's going to do. And it is important to understand music implementation. I think in order to do that, you have to be able to play the games well. Until you get to the point where I was just sort of gifted, because I kind of grew into it as the implementation grew. I'm behind the scenes all the time now, so I already know how the clocks are tuned and cranked, and I don't really need to study the gameplay. But you know, I'm also old and crusty, so if you're young, go for it, please.
That's awesome. Well, Jason, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of an increasingly busy day. As always, you are awesome, and thank you so much for sharing your information. If people want to hear, or if they want to check you out, where should they go, and how can they follow you on the socials and all that?
Right, I've got Twitter is actually where I'm the most active, and that's just JG Music. My Facebook and my website are maintained by someone else, but they run everything by me, so it's not like a third party that I don't have any opinions on. But it's sort of just like news and stuff like that. And I do have a YouTube channel that's sorely out of date, but that's Audio Arc on YouTube, and there's probably 40 hours of material up there, more like this, just talking about all kinds of things. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much, Jason.
Oh, totally my pleasure, of course.
Totally. And thank you guys, students, for joining us for this AMA. I will be putting an archive in the announcement section of the class, and be on the lookout for if any of your instructors invited you. If you're not in Project Portfolio 2 or the seminar, the career seminar, then check with your instructor to get the archive for this. But that's going to do it with us. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Peace. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft here, going over your metadata spreadsheet assignment. So first of all, I hope you're doing okay. Thank you so much for joining us this month. So the metadata assignment, what we're doing is you're going to choose one queue and you're going to write metadata about that queue in a numbers spreadsheet. Now, the assignment itself goes over all of the aspects that you're going to need to know, starting with the title, making sure that we have a new title that makes sense, that is short and descriptive, and so you can read the information. The description is a narrative description where it's not just keywords, but it's an actual narrative description talking about next the genre of the cue. So is it a hip-hop cue, is it an orchestral cue, is it a soundtrack cue? Be really careful here. Things like tension, that's not a genre. Tension is an emotion, but not necessarily a genre. What tension is, however, is a mood. So talking about mood, the energy, your energy has to be low, medium, high, or building, has to be one of those terms. Tags, keywords, the musical information, the key, the BPM, length, the instrumentation, and the sounds like is it sounds like an artist or composer, not it sounds like Harry Potter or it sounds like Star Wars, but this does need to be a specific composer. And then finally the file name, which incorporates the new title along with the file type extension, so .wav, .af, or something like that. So your assignment is to download this spreadsheet and fill out the spreadsheet with one of your cues, whatever cue you like. Now, if you are currently enrolled in Project and Portfolio 2, I think it's a good idea to use the cue you're using for your Wix discussion post and for your final stems and cutdowns, but that's not required. So you're going to title, description, genre, mood, energy, keywords, key, BPM, length, instrumentation, sounds like, version, and a file name, including the file type extension and the new title. So that is the assignment, the metadata spreadsheet assignment. Really, really appreciate you. And if you have any questions, please, as always, don't hesitate to let me know. Thanks. Hi, my name is Dave Croft. Welcome to Music Production Project and Portfolio 2. Man, I am so glad to have you on board with us this month. We're gonna have a lot of fun, and we're gonna focus on production music, meaning music that lives in a catalog or a library that isn't specifically scored to a scene like you'd see with Temptation Island or Keeping Up with the Kardashians or Top Chef or something like that. So that's the type of music that we're going to be focusing on this month. We're going to be writing a tension cue, we're going to write a hip hop cue, we're going to write a positive cue, and we're also in the last week of the month we're going to look at what libraries and clients are looking for in their deliverables, things like special stems and cut downs and different versions of our cue. But that feels a little overwhelming, especially maybe if you've never really written a lot of music before, and maybe Project 1 was the first time you really dug into it. Well, that's okay, because we're going to talk about creativity, sustainable creativity, and how to keep those creative juices flowing a little bit. But first, let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I am a composer. I didn't start playing music when I was 3 or anything like that. I was a band nerd. I started band in 6th grade, and I picked up percussion. And I've always been a drummer and a percussionist. But it was in middle school that I heard the score for one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, and that is Back to the Future by Alan Silvestri. And that was the first score that I heard that I knew I wanted to be a composer. And it really electrified me. So I've always been kind of writing music, and movie soundtracks, those have always been a part of my life. And so luckily I had some parents who were into Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, and I can remember as a kid listening to records on headphones, all of Beethoven's symphonies. So fast forward, my college experience got me into music education as well as music composition, and I ended up getting a degree in music history, and my master's is in jazz and studio music. What does all that have to do with this class? Well, I bring a lot of different college experiences to the table, and I've really been where you are. There were periods of my life where I thought I would never make it as a musician. I'm still dealing with insecurities and imposter syndrome, and one of the things I like to think that I'm just like you. I've made so many of the same mistakes. I've walked through so many of the same things as you, and maybe you're sitting in this class and you want to be a professional composer. You want to make a living making music. Well, I do that. I have music that is on CBS Sports, whether it's the NFL on CBS or PGA or the NCAA tournament. Also have had cues show up on Netflix and the History Channel and TLC and TNT and USA Network, just to name a few. I don't say that to humble brag. I only say that to let you know that I am you, just a future version of you, maybe down the same path. This class is really built from the ground up to give you an industry experience and what it feels like to be a professional working composer, at least a professional composer in terms of production music. So everything in the class is geared towards trying to replicate as much as we can, in a class, trying to replicate that experience. So working with publishers, working with timelines, working with requirements that may mean that you're writing something that maybe you've never written before. Quick turnarounds, deadlines, specific file deliveries, all of that goes into it. Even maintaining spreadsheets and catalogs and working with metadata and tags and uploading and all of that. We'll get into all of that this month. But this class really works towards giving you, as much as possible, that real world experience. And that's one of the things we strive as you first time you really dug into it. Well, that's okay, because we're going to talk about creativity, sustainable creativity, and how to keep those creative juices flowing a little bit. But first, let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I am a composer. I didn't, I didn't start playing music when I was 3 or anything like that. I was a band nerd. I started band in 6th grade, and I picked up percussion. And I've always been a drummer and a percussionist. But it was in middle school that I heard the score for one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, and that is Back to the Future by Alan Silvestri. And that was really, man, that was the first score that I heard that I knew I wanted to be a composer. And it really electrified me. So I've always been kind of writing music, and movie soundtracks. Those have always been a part of my life. And so luckily I had some parents who were into Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, and I can remember as a kid listening to records on headphones, all of Beethoven's symphonies. So fast forward, my college experience got me into music education as well as music composition, and I ended up getting a degree in music history, and my master's is in jazz and studio music. What does all that have to do with this class? Well, I bring a lot of different college experiences to the table, and I've really been where you are. There were periods of my life where I thought I would never make it as a musician. I'm still dealing with insecurities and imposter syndrome, and one of the things I like to think of, I like to think that I'm just like you. I've made so many of the same mistakes. I've walked through so many of the same things as you, and maybe you're sitting in this class and you want to be a professional composer. You want to make a living making music. Well, I do that. I have music that is on CBS Sports, whether it's the NFL on CBS or PGA or the NCAA tournament. Also have had cues show up on Netflix and the History Channel and TLC and TNT and USA Network, just to name a few. I don't say that to humble brag. I only say that to let you know that I am you, just a future version of you, maybe down the same path. This class is really built from the ground up to give you an industry experience and what it feels like to be a professional working composer, at least a professional composer in terms of production music. So everything in the class is geared towards trying to replicate as much as we can, in a class, trying to replicate that experience. So working with publishers, working with timelines, working with requirements that may mean that you're writing something that maybe you've never written before. Quick turnarounds, deadlines, specific file deliveries, all of that goes into it. Even maintaining spreadsheets and catalogs and working with metadata and tags and uploading and all of that. We'll get into all of that this month. But this class really works towards giving you, as much as possible, that real world experience. And that's one of the things we strive for here at Full Sail is real world experience. And this is about as close as it gets, because this is what I am doing in the real world. So I hope you're ready. I hope you're ready not to prove to me that you want this as a career, but I really hope that you're ready to prove to yourself that you have the dedication, the discipline, and yes, the creativity to make it in this industry and to have a career making music. So if you're ready, I'm ready, so let's get started.
tonight. The dramatic season finale of The Bachelor begins.
I am in probably one of the hardest situations I've ever been in my entire life. My heart is literally split between two women.
Yeah.
Lex,
Yo.
it may all look bad, but you got 56 seconds. So you're still in the game. It ain't over yet, baby.
I trust you.
Let's head back to the garage. Oh,
That ain't good. Dang, didn't look like fun, huh?
that looks like a riot.
If you got one on you, he's on you.
What you gotta remember is the unexpected will happen, and you need to be prepared to make split-second decisions.
It got real.
He's still in play. But for now, Lex...
Yeah.
Lex,
Yo.
it may all look bad, but you got 56 seconds. So you're still in the game. It ain't over yet, baby.
I trust you.
Let's head back to the garage. Oh,
That ain't good. Dang, didn't look like fun, huh?
that looks like a riot.
If you got one on you, he's on you.
What you gotta remember is the unexpected will happen, and you need to be...
And now it's about continuing to stay on our guys, about our culture and who we are, and then also getting around the new guys and teaching them exactly what we're all about.
And this game is not easy. The grind of the season is not easy. But in every sacrifice you make, you know you have to make sacrifices in life for anything to be special. Nothing's going to be given to you. And we're not just going to show up on our talent alone and expect to win. Not happening. You know that? We understand how we do things now, right? You heard guys say, this is how we do things. That's when you know it's starting to come around. We're going to outwork our opponents. And we're going to have to overcome some mistakes this season, I promise. It won't be perfect. You set the standard. You know the standard. We're going to be selfish. We're going to take strain off our teammates. Be tough. It's all about discipline, man. You got to have discipline in this game. And you got to have to win every single day. You want fans in the stands? Outwork our opponent. Have high expectations, man. 2016 team, what legacy do they leave? The foundation of our culture, what we began. I thought they did a hell of a job of team chemistry. Buying in all together, loving one another, offense, defense, special teams. No finger pointing. No division. That's the legacy they left. And they left a legacy of going to bowl games. Every year, every team is new. And every team will leave a legacy. What's your legacy going to be? Because you're going to leave one. What's our mission? Win our bowl game. We will accomplish that mission. Win our bowl game. Oh, I got more for you. We're going to leave a legacy. We will accomplish that mission. Everybody on the same page? Yes, sir.
Hey, how's it going? Well, hey, this has definitely been a long journey. I've been tempted, like, definitely been tempted. And, you know, her name was Medina. She was somebody that I've really formed a great connection with. Like, I don't know, at one point, I did feel myself falling for her, like, for real. We did not have sex. You know, we cuddled. That was, you know, cuddling was really intimate for me. You know, we kissed. We shared a few, you know, passionate, intimate kisses. She's a great woman. She's taught me some things, you know, and with that said, we have a great friendship at this point.
It was only by a miracle that Michelle Kerr survived. Later, investigators were able to talk to her.
Well, that happened for George on the state of Alaska. I don't know. How do you know that it was from Doug, Michelle? Because George put him in jail.
So you start connecting those dots, it became pretty clear that Doug, that she was referring to, was Doug Gustafson.
But the people with the best motive also had the best alibi. They were incarcerated. I will put that device together for you. I don't want you to blow yourself and the children up. Craig takes all the components, assembles the device, and gives it to Peggy.
Peggy, in one of the great lapses of judgment in human history, drives to the post office with her daughter in the car over a bumpy road and a bomb in the backseat.
Camellia, the 10th hole at Augusta. Well, this is the wonderful thing about the Masters. You all know these holes so well. And there's the turn. Look at it as it really goes round the corner. That's what they're trying to do. Catch the speed slope. If you land up that right side, it sticks up, then you lose 30 plus yards. The old green used to be just past that bunker there. And then they moved it moons ago. Flag back, left corner in that shadow. Saw Rory block it up the right side. Cannot miss it left, cannot miss it long, cannot miss it short.
All right, so mixing is seen as this kind of dark, nebulous art, especially when we get into kind of mastering and that whole side of things. But we're going to break it down into three components: equalization, pencil here, EQing or equalization, mixing, and mastering. Now we're approaching this, and I'm approaching this as if we are going towards the deliverable phase, meaning everything is composed and we are actually delivering our cue to the library. That having been said, as you're actively composing, it's not unusual at all to do a little bit of EQ work and everything, but to be honest, when I write, there have been many times where I go to do the final mix and I never touch the faders before. Like when I go, I will throw an EQ when everything's composed. So this will make it feel a lot linear than it sometimes is, but we're just working under the assumption that we are approaching the delivery phase and everything is composed. But in actuality, things like the EQing and some of the rough mixing, that happens during the composition phase. But let's break each one of these in. Let's first talk about equalization. Now, EQing is the process of making sure that all of your sounds sound good together, which means I do want to see an EQ filter on every track, or at least the top of every track stack. So if you have a drum track stack, I'm okay with you putting one EQ on the top of a drum stack. I'm okay if you have like a glockenspiel and vibraphone stack, or all of your strings are on one stack. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Some people would argue with that, but in the back of my mind, I have 1,000 tracks to write, so I can't spend 8 hours dialing in my kick sound. So I gotta get on with it. That's not to say I don't want good mixes, but if I'm looking for ways to expedite the production process, that's some of the ways I would do that. And I also don't get heavily, just personally, I don't get heavily into EQs on effects buses unless I notice something is awry. But I have found that if I've done my EQ work on the tracks, then that
I've got
kind of
family
takes
in
care
Moore.
of the
I heard the flood was spreading, so I went to see if they were all right.
Now, why do we need to
The
put
back of them glowing
EQs on everything?
things
Well, it's
found me in the meadow.
because we have a finite
I ran
amount
for
of
my
gain,
life.
and we have a finite amount of frequency
I never did get to the
to
village.
divvy up. I call
Leave
it the
that to
frequency
us.
budget. You have a finite amount of budget to give out, and every sound that's occurring is going to take from that budget. Now, some of those budgets will overlap, and some of the frequencies overlap quite nicely. But we need to look at each portion of our track and make sure that A, it can be clearly heard, B, that it's not interfering with other sounds and causing other sounds to sound bad, whether it's muddy or clumpy or whatever. Clumping is a term that's used to describe.
It's all right.
If not, I am. So, like cymbals
Did you
and
see
vocals,
the creatures that attacked you?
Creatures?
Pianos and marimbas get on top of each other
Yeah,
all the time.
They came out of
You
nowhere.
have to go through and kind of
They went for
divvy up
Josie first,
how
then me,
all of
and
these
then
frequencies are gonna
they were
blend.
just gone.
How do we
Do
do
you
that?
remember where you
Well,
were?
We incorporate
On the road from
complementary
Oriflamme.
EQ curves.
We just
Complementary
passed
EQ
Moore
curves
when-
is a term that just describes when
when-
you have multiple sounds,
Where's my
making sure that
Joseph?
each of the
It's all
curves
right.
not only address
Just
how
rest
you
now.
want that sound to sound on its own, but
At least we
how
have an
that
idea of
sound
where
and
the
how those
thralls might
EQs
be now.
work in relation
We should head
to
for
each
more.
other. That's complementary EQ curves, because we have a finite frequency budget to divvy up. This is especially important in the low end of our sounds because low end, I'm talking about, sounds 150, 200 hertz and below or so. These are big sound waves that do not play nicely with each other. And so when I do my EQs, I use very aggressive curves on my low end, and as I move up the frequency spectrum, I get more subtle with it. Because there's just mathematically more ways for 2,000 and 2,500 hertz to blend. Let me use a different example. There's mathematically more ways for 1,000 and 1,500 hertz to blend than 100 and 150 hertz before we start hearing phase issues and mixing problems. There's just mathematically more ways. So, aggressive curves on the low end, more subtle as you get higher. So let's look at two of the primary offenders of low end, the kick and the bass. And we have to create complementary EQ curves. Now, we'll create complementary EQ curves all the way up the spectrum on all the tracks, but let's just focus on these two because these are the chief offenders. Meaning, the kick and the bass often have EQs or often have frequency which absolutely step all over each other. And so we have to create EQ curves on each of these tracks to make sure that both of them are heard. How do we do that? Well, what we're going to do with one is cut the low end so that the other sound can occupy the low end by itself. But then we have to go back to the other EQ and make sure that it can be clearly heard. So we're going to cut the low end out of one, then we're going to notch the other. Cut one, notch the other. And we will apply this process kind of all the way up the frequency spectrum, being more subtle as we go higher. The million-dollar question is, how do we determine that? How do we determine what we're going to cut and what we're going to keep? And I shall ask the chat room as I take a sip. What are some factors that help to determine who gets to keep the low end and who gets their low end cut? What do you think? What are some determining factors to help us figure that out? Atwell says, by the way, am I pronouncing that correctly? Let me know. If yes, yeah. Atwell says frequency. So Atwell? It's frequency. Now, give me a little bit more. What exactly do you mean by frequency? Sarah says volume range. So which one is louder? I think between the two of you guys, you're getting there. Angel says, which low-end sound has their core on the lower side? Now we're getting there. Basically,
it was all they could do to escape.
Atwell says the bass might need to make space for the kick, where the actual sound is hitting the range. Yes. Yes to all. Here's how I think of it. Which sound has more low-end energy? Which sound has more low frequency that's louder? There's more gain in the low end, because if I cut the low end from that sound, then it is going to be more greatly affected. So, another way to think of it, which sound would be more greatly affected by a low cut or high pass? I think low cut. Now let's look at our screenshots here. Between the kick and the bass, which of these two has more dynamic gain energy in the low end? Angel says kick. Atwell says bass. And I'm keeping an eye right in here. Atwal says the kick in the screenshot, but most songs the bass has more low end. Well, that there's a big determining factor on that. Angel says bass is more dynamic, which and I love that you guys are kind of using absolutes like this, because there are precious few absolutes in this gig. Whether it's, hey, how loud does it need to be, or is the bass always this way? And I'm here to say it's not always. Each track is individual, and so you should approach each cue with its own set of criteria. So Angel says based on these images, and yeah, that's what we're looking at. So based on these images, there is more low end energy in the kick. So if I were to cut the low end from the kick, its sound would be more greatly affected. And that is the largest, yet not the only consideration. The other considerations: which part is more musically important or more musically active? Now here we have a screenshot, and we really can't tell which that is. It's just a screenshot. The other consideration is what genre is the cue. If it's a trap cue, then that's going to greatly impact. If it's a folk cue, or an orchestral cue, a rock cue, an EDM cue, these all have subtle interpretations of what the relationship of the kick and the bass should be. Now, we don't have that information, so really all we can go off of is which sound would be most affected. So what we're going to need to do is cut the low end off of one sound. In this case, it should be the bass. We're going to clean up the bass and get this out of the way to leave room for this. But now that we've essentially rewritten the fundamental of the bass, we have to make sure that this, excuse me, this really pops through, which means we need to go over here and notch this out. That ends up looking like that. Cut one, notch the other. Make sense? Give me a thumbs up if you're feeling that. I'm getting the bass out of the way to leave room for all of the low end of the kick. Now notice that's a really aggressive low cut. I'm not at all afraid of low cuts, especially with MIDI instruments, and especially in production music, because you have to keep in mind production music is music that's going to be on TV, and it's going to be a really low end mix. So we have to make sure that our bottom end is nice and focused and clear. If it's too muddy, then it's not going to speak through. So, how about I show you? I've got a cue written here. Now these are all bounced waves, but this is a cue that I wrote some time ago. Let's take a quick listen, and then I'm going to apply EQs all the way through. Do note that this is unmixed. There's no EQs. The channels are added, or the plugins are added, but there's no EQs actually done. And notice that everything is at unity gain. This was actually written for Sony, some project that they had.
Look.
I don't know if it ever also
I
a
see
live
them.
day, but
With me.
I paid for it. So that's cool. Yeah, Dawn said, oh, that's something. All right, and clearly I was listening to
Should I prime?
I think his production style. All right, so
Save your strength.
so let's first isolate our base and our kick, and we're going to start putting each piece. Before we even get started, I want to make sure that the output in your master buses always stays always. Because we're going to be applying meters and everything to our master system. We have to set the energy such so that we always keep it. Okay, so let's go ahead and solo these guys. So what I'm going to do is find the loudest sustained portion of the all the sounds are in, and this is as loud as it gets. It's usually this ends up with big energy pushing out. Kind of find the loudest sustained portion of his key. That loudest sustained portion. I guess.
Over here.
Cast the time which is called the button. I'm going to leave my cycle from this segment because this represents the loudest sustained portion. I'm going to turn the analyzer on both of these. I'm going to run through my list. Point number 1. Which sound has more low energy that I want to keep? Between the bass and the kick, what do you guys think? Which has more low-end gain? I know it might be tough to actually hear it through the Zoom feed. But what do we think? Bass or the kick? Atwal says bass. Anybody confer? No, concur, not confer. It's all a different word. Sarah says bass. It is the bass. There is more low end in the bass. So if I were to cut the bass would be more greatly affected. So let's go to our next one, our next option, next consideration. Which sound is more musically important or active? The bass or the kick? Well, it's the bass. The kick is playing 1 and a 3. The bass is playing quarter notes. So it's more active, there's more low end, and this is like a little electro pop type cue, right? It's not a club banger. You know, it doesn't need a kick drum to move a dance floor. It's not a metal cue that needs big solid kick. So all signs point to the bass needing to keep this low end. So what I'm going to do is put a low cut and get the kick out of the way. Right? Step number 1. Cut one, notch the other. So right where this is, and this is why I put them on top of each other. Right where that is, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to notch this out of the way. That leaves what's left of the kick to really punch through the mix. Now let's keep moving. Let's add the snare. I'm going to put some low end. First of all, I'm going to put some low end to clean up the low end. But Dave, there's no low end in there. I don't see it. Well, let me show you something. I'm going to boost the gain and hit play. Boop. Look at that. That is low end floating around below where our meters will show it. But it's there. So I want to see you go through and clean up the low end on all of your sounds, especially if they're recorded. Now, I'm going to keep this right here. I'm going to keep this the same. I'm going to get this kind of out of the way a little bit. This is the snap of the snare. You can actually see it almost looks like distortion where the waves are really kind of jaggedy. Or we have a nice pure waveform here and some jags happening there. I'm going to get that out of the way just because I know I've got a lot coming this way. But I'm going to leave these right here. But according to what I just said, shouldn't I create complementary EQ curves between these two sounds? I don't have to. Can somebody tell me why I don't have to create complementary EQ curves between the kick and the snare? Don says alternating. Exactly. They're not occurring at the same time. So if they're not occurring at the same time, then I don't have to worry about frequency masking. All right, let's keep going. Let's open up the hi-hat. Check this out. I'm going to throw a low cut on the hi-hat because you better believe there is a low end floating around in my hi-hat patch. There it is. It's right there. Now, obviously, I have it way jacked so we could see it on the meters. But it's there, above the noise floor, taking pennies out of our frequency budget. Might not be a big deal if you only have a handful of tracks, but what if you had... But what if you had an orchestral cue with 60 tracks? So I'm going to clean up the low end. They're sounding a little crisp, a little sibilancy. So I'm just going to put a shelf just to duck it down just a little bit. Angel says every penny adds up to $1. 100%. Hey, literally. All right. Now let's. There's the snare and get the kick out of the way of the bass. Let's get the claps. Now these are occurring at the same time. The claps don't come in till later, so I want to give the snare prominence. So I'm going to duck that out. Right, this is where the snare snappiness is. Just cleaning that up just a little bit and keeping kind of the meatiness of that. Right, now there's my cymbal. For the purpose of right now, just for speed, I'm going to put that a little bit closer so you don't have to wait quite as long for the cymbal to hit. It's a little roary. This is a cymbal that I actually recorded. It's a 19-inch K Constantinople, which is just really complex sound. But I just want a little bit more of the shimmer. There we go. So let's go ahead and back this up to bar 38. Shimmer. There we go. So let's go ahead and back this up to bar 38. And let's, and again, watch the archive. for this. By the way, the archive will be posted up this afternoon. I post them in the virtual class registration archives and Zoom Labs activity, or the archives activity, and I will send out an announcement about that. I do post them up to YouTube so that you could add them to your own playlist or whatever if you want to do that. It will be an unlisted YouTube link, so if you're if you subscribe and my YouTube channel. Hey, thanks, Don. You won't see that pop up in your subscription feed, but just depending on how long it takes.
Do you think there are more?
There are always more. But I'd say we've done what we can for the time being.
Then we should let Isabel know.
You have the town's thanks.
Don't thank us yet. There will be more. Many more. And you'll need to be ready for them.
Oh, we shall. Isn't that right, Captain?
Yes, milady. The garrison will be ready.
Philippe here has convinced most of the men to remain at their posts. For now, at least.
Hearing that the Dane would look kindly on any man who committed himself to the task certainly didn't hurt. It's not the most selfless of motives, I'll admit. But whatever it takes, eh? Now me, I never needed convincing. I became a soldier to protect the people I love. And the people I love include the ones standing before me.
Handsome and chivalrous.
Now, if you don't mind, I have sentries to post. Milady.
Lest you wonder, I'm not foolish enough to believe that this has solved all of my problems. But it has solved one, and that's one fewer than I had this morning. Thank you again, Clive.
This man's gonna die if we don't get him to a healer.
All our beds are taken.
Martha, it's good to see you.
And you, Clive. Jill?
Otto said you'd been attacked by a Kashik. What exactly happened here?
Those skies are what happened. Not long after they fell dark, we had our first visit. There were hundreds of them. Tried to storm the hill. Only a handful made it up here, but that was more than enough. The rest are still down there now. And while we have a few willing fighters holding them back, they're sorely outnumbered.
What do you think, Clive?
That we join the fight.
I thought you'd never offer. Now, where I need you is the Fallen Gate. That's where the fighting is fiercest. Let the men know you've come to help. Something tells me they'll be pleased to see you.
We're on our way.
Do you think there were as many as Martha says?
More.
You don't think they've abandoned us, do you? Them not. Not a chance.
Clive, wounded.
We deal with the Akashic first. Not good. You're finished. Nice try.
These men don't have the look of hired swords.
If you've come to rob this place,
You are mistaken, my Lord Rosfield. We're here by Madame Martha's leave.
how do you know my name?
Forgive me, my lord. There wasn't time for introductions. We're with the Guardians of the Flame.
Wade's men? But how did you come to be here? Where is your commander?
Sir Wade left earlier with a scouting party to find out where the Akashic were coming from.
Did he? Take your wounded back to the inn. Martha will see you're looked after. We'll join you anon.
And to think you took them for thieves. A fine reward for holding off the horde, that is.
When did Wade and his men arrive?
Not long after Rosalith fell. The Guardians asked me to shelter some of them that had lost their homes. They were making ready to leave just as the skies turned, and we agreed it was best we stuck together.
Martha! Trouble! The scouting party's almost at the lift, but they got a pack of Akashic snapping at their heels! And they got wounded with them! They're not gonna make it!
Damn it all.
We'll worry about them, Martha.
You look after everyone here. If any can still fight, send them to the lift.
I will. You two be safe now.
Mad dogs. A lot of them.
Squire, I need you to get those who can still walk up the lift to Martha's. But what about... I didn't ask, Oscar. Sir.
Sir Wade.
Lord Rosfield. If you aren't a sight for sore eyes.
Martha seemed to think you might need some help. And by the looks of it...
We thought we could sneak by them. But we didn't know there would be so many. How could we have?
behind you!
Damn it! We need to get the injured to safety.
Do you think we can hold them off?
We can certainly try. Are you with us, Sir Wade?
Always.
Then let's do our duty.
To actually process. All right, so let's listen. Woo. Oh yeah, it's so whumpy. And now that we've gotten the bass has that low end all to itself. And this is one of the things that, especially like if you write hip hop keys or hip hop beats or whatever, and you're like, my 808s aren't slapping enough.
Bot Rix has correctly joined the channel.
How do you fix that? They're not low enough. They're not like rattling my subs, and I'm going to throw more bass on there. Well, that creates the opposite effect. It actually will create phase issues that will cancel the sounds out. So increasing bass is usually about isolating one bass sound and giving it at the low end than just dumping more and more bass. Because bass frequencies are bullies and they do not play nicely with others. All right, so with that done, let's move on to my next section. I compose in groups, and John Williams, I don't know him, I'm not John Williams, but he calls these choirs, and that's how he thinks all of his brass are doing something, all of his strings are doing something, and he kind of writes in chunks and then kind of blends them all together. So this is my, I call it kind of my rhythmic undercurrent. It's primarily the harmonic, communicating the harmonic language, the chord progression, whether it's chord progressions, being arpeggiated or sounded or whatever. So this is all my rhythmic undercurrent. All right, so let's get started. Let's start off first with my marimba. It's kind of a Rugrats kind of thing. Let's clean up the low end. Let's get my dulcimer involved after that. Love me some dulcimer. And the Logic dulcimer is rock solid, as is the marimba, as is Logic's handpan. It might be called metal drum. All right, so I need to get this out of the way. Come on, give me that note. I'm going to tuck that out. Now you see I'm not going wham, right? I'm just getting it. Getting that a little bit out of the way. Let's boost that guy just a little bit. Have a little bit of shimmer here. And by the way, I'm just hitting the V key to show that and open it. Let's get the celeste involved. Just tuck that back just a little bit. Now there are two types of sounds where I will use a gentler slope on the low end. They are pianos and pads, generally because those sounds, they occupy a much broader frequency spectrum. It's not like a snare with some low end that shouldn't be there. It's just muddying up my low end. We're talking about like the piano has low end sympathetic vibrations that are just inherently part of the way a good piano sounds. So if I cut off too much of the low end, it sounds thin, and so I will use a gentler slope. And that's what I mean by slope. Like that's a really extreme slope. That's a gentler slope. Now notice I am using the pass filters as opposed to a shelf. All right, I shelve the top end past the low end. Meaning I don't do this a lot at all. And by the way, I don't want to see that. I call this siloing, where you think, okay, my dulcimer is here, so I'm going to clean up the bottom end, the high end, just like I clean up the low end. Actually, this will completely squash overtones and upper harmonics, which give life to sounds. And so if you come in it from the bottom end and the top end, then you create this really kind of hollowy, tinny, but not bright sound. So don't aggressive on the low end, it's more subtle on the top end. So if you need to back down, then use the shelf just to tuck it down a little bit. Do not silo like this. Yeah, Atwal says like phone voice. Yeah, that's absolutely what it's creating. Which, by the way, just a side note, if you need to create that effect, don't spend hours and hours with plugins. Just do this and record that into your microphone. It'll be much easier. Yeah. Don says they should cover that in sequencing tech. Yeah, maybe so. And these are just, these are just lessons from the road, But let me see if I can't isolate and kind of demonstrate this. I've got my dulcimer here. There's all that sparkle, and that creates a muffled sound. And that's all these little spikes in the frequency. Those are all upper harmonics. Let me show you another sound here, which clearly shows harmonics. All right. So first of all, low end. Look at that. Come on now, get out of my face, glockenspiel. But here we have the fundamental. These are the upper harmonics, or the upper overtones. Right? And overtones are usually at the octave level, and then a fifth, or a fifth and an octave, and then a fourth, and then a third, like a major third, and then so on. Okay, now I'm going to use a non-stock Logic plugin to show you this, because Logic doesn't have a way to kind of easily isolate frequencies, but the FabFilter does. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to solo. Alright, so that is... Let's see if I can get it here. Alright, so that is the root.
How do?
That's so high you can't even hear it. Ooh, it's making my teeth itch. Alright, yeah, I can't do it. It's so high. It's like only the dogs are hearing that at that point. But yeah, you can see what I'm talking about.
Thanks very much.
Alright, back to it.
There you
So
go.
this is a little
Thanks
brittle
very
up top,
much.
so I'm going to use a shelf.
There you go.
And what that's doing is it's tamping down. You can almost see it. It's tamping down that upper harmonic.
Thanks very
much.
much.
Like Dennis DeRail way up at 18K, right? And so I'm just tamping it down so my overtones are a little better. All right, so those are my rhythmic undercurrents. Let's listen to why is my piano like that?
Squire, I need you to get those who can still walk up the lift to Martha's. But what about... I didn't ask, Oscar. Sir.
Sir Wade.
Lord Rosfield, if you aren't a sight for sore eyes.
Martha seemed to think you might need some help. And by the looks of it...
Keep in mind, everything is still at Unity Game.
But we didn't know there would be so many.
All right, the next thing I need to work on are these other, whether it's like this is just a pad. This is just kind of my ear candy. Some melodic things. So
We
let's
need
look
to
at
get
the
the engine
cello
to
first.
safety. Do you think we can hold them off?
We can certainly try.
And this is the Vienna Symphonic Library
Are you with us, Sir
cello,
Wade?
the Portamento.
Always.
That sounds so good.
Then let's do
It
our
almost sounds like an
duty.
air who. I don't want to cut too much of it. A little bit of sound. Speaking of, let's look at our pitch that I don't like. It's good, right? Let's first talk about equalization to these types of problems. All right, so I'm going to put an EQ curve to compensate for that. All right, but this is a technical solution to a mixing problem. It's actually a technical solution to a musical problem, which is that note's too loud. When possible, I look for musical solutions to these types of problems. Now, I only have the stems, so I can't go in and adjust the MIDI. But if I had the MIDI, the solution to that isn't to do an EQ curve. The solution is to go into the MIDI and reduce the velocity. I think of my MIDI instruments and my MIDI regions as little performers, right? And so if this were in a studio and this was a live player, I would say that note's too loud, let's track it again, this time don't play that note so loud. And so by adjusting the velocity, every time I hit play, it's like my little virtual player, my little virtual musician playing whatever I tell it to play. And so by reducing the velocity, it generates a different performance. And if you're dealing with sample libraries that have velocity layers, you might literally get a different sound at a different velocity.
Is anyone hurt?
Adds to the realism.
I
So
don't
when
think
possible, I always look for
And
musical
yet again,
solution
you've
to
pulled me
these
from the
solutions
flames.
to these types of problems.
It's just a pity I keep walking into them.
Here's another example. I keep hitting that. Sorry, guys.
You've never been one to
Here's
shy away
another
from danger,
example.
Sir Wade.
Let's
like any
say
shield
I
worthy
have
of the
a
name.
marimba part and a piano part on
I
top of
see
each
you're
other.
all in one piece.
They're on top of each other.
Martha!
Is something
The
wrong?
technical solution is to throw some
Look out
EQ
for
curves and
smoke
call it
coming
a day.
from
That's
down
the
East
technical
Poolway.
solution.
Too
However,
thick to be a hearth.
what would the musical
second
solution
thought.
to that problem be?
Feel like finishing the
Marimba
job.
part, piano part on
Always.
top of each other. What's the musical response?
Jill
to
and I
that?
will make for East Pool. You'll need to move the injured without us.
Don't you worry about them.
The moment my men are safe, I'll follow. Good luck.
We have a marimba part and a piano part, and they're on top of each other. Angel says give them unique parts. I don't mean like rhythmically, like frequency-wise they're on top of each other. Maybe they're playing different parts. But frequency-wise they're on top of each other. They're overlapping. They're masking each other. Angel says split the frequency. That's the technical response. Go into the EQs and create complementary EQ curves, which is what this whole lesson's about, right? But what's the musical response to that? What's the composer response to that? Angel says adjust the velocities. Atwal says make them run a more complementary, play less. Okay, that's actually a good solution. Make sure that the piano and the marimba part aren't simultaneously occurring. That's absolutely a good response to that. But I think there's an easier response, and that is, since you have the MIDI, put the marimba up the octave, or put the piano up the octave, or take the bottom two notes of the marimba. Yep, Angel said octave shift. Yep, and move it up. Just get it a little bit out of the way, and then adjust some EQs. My point is you should, as composers, we should always be looking for musical solutions to these types of problems, and jumping on an EQ and curving things out, these are almost the last solutions. Not always. And here we have the audio, so we don't have that option. But if I had the MIDI on this part here, I would just adjust the velocity and reduce that one note. Same way, like let's say you have one snare hit that's too loud. If this was recorded audio, the technical solution is to throw a gate or throw in a compressor or a limiter or something on there to tamp down those transients. But as a composer, you have the MIDI, so don't throw a limiter on a snare track just because one note's too loud. Don't automate the fader. No, adjust the velocity. What that means for me in this class is you will see me mix with velocities much more than you see me do. You won't see me do. You'll see me do very little fader automation. Very little fader automation. Cool. So let's listen to it without and with. Dig it. I dig it. we have everything EQ'd, now it's time to mix our cue in preparation of the mastering phase. And so if EQing is the vertical, making sure that everything kind of sounds good together, mixing is making sure that everything sounds good kind of over time. And we're going to be doing this from the loudest sustained portion of the cue. It starts with the approach, meaning mixing is making sure that everything sounds good kind of over time. And we're going to be doing this from the loudest sustained portion of the cue. It starts with the approach, meaning what style are we going for, what kind of genre it is, but really what dominates your approach is what the library requirements are. And knowing that our cue is going to be on TV, it's going to be really low in the mix, then that dictates some of our choices. But the genre does impact that, as does anything from the library. So we start from our loudest sustained portion, and we're going to create a balanced static mix, meaning with no automation, we're going to create a balanced static mix. We're going to get all the levels of the instrumentation where we want them so that what's most important is most heard. Nothing's sticking out, nothing's too quiet, everything's nice and balanced. And then, if we want, we can apply automation tweaks later. This is where I will go into the MIDI, where if I'll create my balanced static mix and then listen to it over time, and I'll say, you know, I mixed the piano at this volume because it really worked in the loudest portion, but because with the piano all by itself it's too loud, then instead of fader automation, I'll go in and bring the velocities down, which will give me a much more believable performance. Now, how loud should we make our cue? Well, we're going to be applying a mastering chain, and the mastering chain requires gain to work properly. We'll talk about mastering here in a second. And because it needs gain, and the mastering process is going to add dB to our mix, we have to leave room for it in our pre-mastered mix. That the room we leave for the mastering process is called headroom. And how much headroom? I'm about to tell you. We need to mix our cue so that the stereo out, the peaks on the stereo out, exceed -6, but do not exceed -4. The peaks, these peaks, reach above -6, but do not exceed -4. This is your output. You are not looking to create that headroom across all of your tracks. What we should be looking at here is making sure that we don't go into the red or orange at any point. By the way, when I say red or orange, I mean the whole number gets loud. Like this is a... Let me try that. I'm trying to peak some of these, but they're not. All right, let me do this. Right, that's bad. That's an orange number. That's bad. So don't do that. We're going to be talking about that here in just a second, Etwal. We're talking about how loud it should be and all of that. We use RMS in this class as opposed to LUFS, and I'll talk about why here in a second. All right, so you don't have to reach 4 to 6 dB of headroom on the tracks. We're looking for 4 to 6 dB on the output. Okay? Now, here's the mixing method that I want you to apply. You don't have to record yourself doing this or anything. Just trust me. Just trust me as a future version of you. Now, this is a mixing method that I learned from a fellow professor here at Full Sail. His name's Fight Rin. You will have him later in your studies here. And the dude literally has platinum records from his time with Backstreet Boys, I believe. Might have been NSYNC, or both. Now, whatever you think about those 90s boy bands is irrelevant. Dude has hardware. I'm going to assume he knows more than I do. And he taught me this mixing method, and it is nearly foolproof. And I've never, ever regretted doing this mixing method, but I've absolutely regretted not doing it. So here it is. This is the method. And this is everything's written and EQ'd and you're about to deliver for mastering. First of all, flatten all of your faders. Bring all of your faders down. Turn off automation and lower everything all the way down. Then, create a mix by bringing in the most important element first and bring everything else in relationship to that, keeping an eye on our output fader so that the peaks don't exceed -4, but do get above -6. Here's what's interesting about this. Whatever you bring in first, think of it this way, it becomes the sun in the solar system of your mix. So everything's going to revolve around whatever instrument you bring in first. Everything gets mixed in relation to whatever you bring in first. So if you bring in the most important thing first, then everything gets revolved around that. And the most important thing becomes the focus, becomes the gravity in the solar system of your mix. Next, flatten all of your faders. Don't take screenshots. Don't write down numbers. Don't make alternatives. Just trust me. Flatten all of your faders. I'm not going to lie, that can be heartbreaking. Why? Because you just got to a good mix. But this method absolutely helps. Then mix 2. Mix your track again the same way, but instead of bringing in the most important element, this time bring in an element that you know is not the most important thing. This is forcing an unimportant element into the center of your mix, and everything gets mixed in relationship to that, or in relation to that. And what you end up with is a subtly different view of your mix that you wouldn't have consciously done before. Mix 2 is my favorite part of this whole process because I feel like it feels like hearing your mix and somebody else mixed it because you intentionally went against your instincts, and the end result is a mix that will sound subtly different from your first mix. It could be different in the dynamic range. It could be different in the rhythmic energy because you brought something in later, and it's fascinating. And then flatten all of your faders. I know it's scary, but just flatten all of your faders, and then mix your track a third time, bringing in that most important element first. Looking at your faders, keeping an eye on your output to make sure that you don't exceed -4 dB, but you do get above -6. And then finally, put on your mastering chain, and we'll talk about that here in a second. There are some very real benefits of this. Benefit number 1, the greatest benefit, is you overcome the very real fear of touching your faders, because so many of us just have stumbled into a good mix. And you shouldn't ever stumble into a good mix. A good mix shouldn't be an accident. Why? For 2 reasons. Reason number 1, that is not sustainable. If you just want to accidentally have a good mix, then good luck on accidentally getting 1,000 good mixes. It's not sustainable. You should know exactly how your good mix got there so that you can replicate it and sustain it. Issue number 2, if you accidentally stumble into a good mix and your client says fix it, you can't, because you don't know how you got there. You don't know how what was wrong even occurred because you just bumbled your way into it. So what do you have to do? What do you try to do? Well, you try to stumble your way into a solution. See point number 1, that's not sustainable. So overcoming that fear is very, very real. And I get it. Remember? I'm just a future version of you. Next, you get to know every part of that specific track very well. Even though I'm writing 30 different dramedy cues, each one has its own little intricacies. And so by doing this mixing method, that helps with that. You get to know those specific tracks. You get faster at it, and I promise you get better at it. I don't give many like rock solid guarantees in this class. This is absolutely one of them. I guarantee you, if you do this, you will get better and faster at mixing. Now, I'm not going to say that mix number 3 is always the perfect one, because sometimes, if I'm being real, Sometimes mix number 3 isn't as good as mix number 2. Do you undo, undo, undo? No. You have mix number 4. Maybe mix number 5. And that's okay. Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes you've been writing for hours and you just want to deliver. You've got a deadline. The last thing you want to do is just flatten mix, flatten mix, flatten mix, master. But like I said, I've never regretted doing this, but I've absolutely regretted not doing this. How about I show you? All right, so I'm here still in our loudest sustained portion of the cue. Oops, I do. And so we're going to drop all of that. Let's bring in our most important aspects, and I'm keeping an eye on my output here. I need 4 to 6 dB. The peaks go above -6, but do not exceed -4. Let's bring in the dulcimer. Now you might say, it's not -4 or -6. Well, hang on, because watch what happens when I bring in the low end. Boom. Low end absolutely gobbles up gain. So as soon as you start bringing in your low end, then that's how it's going to really affect your mix. Atwal asks an amazing question. Would you recommend this method for even large mixes like 50 tracks plus? Absolutely. However, you can divide and conquer. And so when I have large sessions, like let's say I have like 10 different drum or percussion tracks, then I will create one track stack and I will do flatten mix, flatten mix, flatten mix on the whole track stack, collapse it, and then use the one fader to move everything together. So that's how I approach large mixes. Like I said, divide and conquer, create track stacks, and do this mixing method in sections. Yep, 100%. All right, I'm already at -6, so I'm almost there, but I've got the majority of my low end, and everything else should push it above. Yeah, yep, see it? That's mix number 1. Mix number 2. I want to bring in something I know is not the most important thing. In this case, I'm going to bring in the pad first. And I know the melody is the melody, but it's not the thing that I want, like, sticking out in the mix. Yeah, it's just subtly different. Now for me, I like to live in the 5s and then peak into the 4s. So I have that burst of energy right there at the end. What I don't want to see is you living in the 6s, the low 6s and 7s, or high 6s and 7s, and then barely flick into -6. Right? That's not going to lose any points, but that's going to create all kinds of problems for you in terms of your mastering chain. All right, last mix. Let's bring in that. Now, what I'm not doing is I'm not like memorizing numbers. I'm not like running some script in my head. Like I know exactly how this needs to be because I've done this 100 times. No, every month I mix this fresh. So I'm gonna kind of overclock that a little bit and then tuck it down. Just I'm letting my ear grab it and then I'm pulling it back in the mix. All right, I like the mix, but it's a little too low. So how do I fix it? I'm gonna shift select all of these, and then I'm gonna nudge them. It's gonna pull them all up in relation to each other. There we go.
Bot Rix has correctly joined the channel. Now, I know mastering feels like some dark art, some ancient voodoo that you have to be blessed with golden ears and thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and that might be true. Atwal, go ahead and ask your question. might be true, but it's not true anymore. It might have been true. But plugins make all of this possible. Atwal asked, do I throw a limiter on? I'm about to talk about that. Yep. Because so far we haven't added anything to our master chain, and that's what we're about to do.